Bum 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 bum. The Peter Like Show. Bum 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 bum. I want to thank you guys for continuing to pray for me by hitting one of the prayer buttons on my video. It doesn't really matter anymore. And I just like to think that when these things go right, that all of those prayers have been answered. Let's pray again. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Like Show. Bum 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 bum. All right, recording this on May 22nd, 23rd, 2025, of the 6 month anniversary of when I returned to the dating scene. I want to say this is my third biggest or third dating season in my life. I've had two others, so I'll talk about it in a moment. But first, this one. What had happened was, a year ago today, I was living a very solid relationship with myself, and I was very happy with that relationship, except for one problem. I got a really bad case of long COVID, June, July of last year, and the weather here topped out at 110, 115 degrees. And I quickly realized that no matter how well you're doing in life, you get a curveball like that, everybody throws you out, right? Especially here in individualistic the United States, right? In another country, it may not have turned out like that. After my situation, I talked to a few people that I knew from other countries, and they all thought that was a foreign concept. And I, uh, I actually started, wouldn't say dating, but I made a connection in Taiwan the last time I was in Taiwan. And she had thought about coming to the United States to study, but after hearing about my story, it's really changed her perspective on that. She doesn't think that would happen in Taiwan. I don't think so either. But it prompted me to make new connections. But at the same time, I didn't know where to begin. Gotta understand, it had been 5 years since I'd last seriously dated, and when I moved to Phoenix, that was not a big part of my life here in Phoenix. And I was competing in a bunch of computer AI conferences. I was making art. I was going to art shows. The concept of dating hadn't really entered my thoughts ever since I moved to Phoenix almost 3 years ago now. I didn't know where to begin. And so, but I did have a few groups that I went to, but live in individualistic America, right? And so none of them really had any insight. I mean, they weren't against me dating, but they got other things on their mind. And so I decided to offer a reward for anybody who could set me up on a blind date. You guys saw. I offered a 1 kilogram bar of poor man's gold, and then I added a bunch of my art as well. I ended up giving uh, about 40 pounds worth of art I made out of crystalline gold. And so my friend at church thought I was crazy. He said that you're going to get scammed. And at that point in my life, I had so few connections that the concept of getting scammed, as long as I get to talk to somebody, wasn't the end of the world. And so after we had talked a little bit, and the funny thing is, I've offered many, many rewards since then. I've never really gotten scammed. Have I gotten dates that went nowhere? Sure. Sure, I have. I will admit that. But you know what? Did they really go nowhere? If I learned something from it? Anyways, he set me up on a blind date, and he didn't want the reward. Um, and so I had to give it to him because for good karma purposes. And did that date go anywhere? Yes and no. I learned a lot from it. I made some connections. Unfortunately, some of the connections turned south, but you know what? I talked to her a few nights ago, and everything's still good. And so that was good. But it was bittersweet because a week after that date, my grandmother passed away. She was 91 years old. And so that was the last. I don't even know if she heard about me returning to the dating scene. I don't talk to my grandparents very much. But I did talk to my dad about the whole situation. So that was the last thing she saw me do. So that was good. And then I'm so glad I got to go on that date because part of the reason I hadn't traveled to Taiwan in 5 years is that I was so messed up with my situation here in Phoenix. You know, we all talk about the post vacation blues, right? But having to come home to a mess probably would make the post vacation blues 100 times worse. And I didn't want to deal with that. And so my solution was to never go on vacation, if you can believe that. Grandmother passed away, and I really had to go to the funeral. I went. When I read my grandmother's story, and I discovered she was born just before Mary Curry passed away. And I thought Mary Curry could probably set me up on a blind date as well. And so Mary Curry obviously discovered Polish gold, and Polish gold is now made from crystalline gold. So when I went to the funeral, I left a small chunk of crystalline gold in the casket for my grandmother to give to Mary Curry so she could continue her research. And I asked Mary Curry to set me up on a blind date. I left the funeral, and then I went to. I stayed in a hostel for a short holiday, and for some bizarre reason that I still cannot explain, because I hadn't used online dating for a very long time, I decided to try Bumble again. And when I logged on to Bumble, I was aghast at what I had last put in there when I used it. First of all, back when I was still using it, I was grappling with binge eating problems. I was considerably heavier than I am today. And also, I had put in a lot of cringy things in the profile. I used to love stargazing. I would drive to, I was living in Seattle. I would drive to Ellensburg to do stargazing. And I was competing in the computer Olympiad. That's all I wanted to talk about. I mean, I still compete, but it's not my whole life anymore. Long story short, I had to start all over again. It was cringeworthy. And before I knew it, I met a girl over in Taiwan, and we really hit it off big. I was so depressed about having to fly out of Taiwan, and this is where cultural differences, you can tell. As I was leaving the hostel in Taiwan to fly home to the United States, I was so depressed out of my mind. But none of my roommates gave me heck about that. In fact, they really helped me pack up and everything. Here in the United States, good luck trying to do that. You know, you guys have seen. I've tried it. I always get into a huge altercation when I'm depressed on vacation in a hostel. Nobody will care. So I fly home to the United States, and I don't have very good luck with the online dating profiles here in the United States. Not as much as I do in Taiwan or even some other countries that I've been to. And so I decided as a joke to ask people to swipe left on the profile. Hey, I've already gotten like a couple weeks of left swipes. Why don't we continue it? I want to see what happens with the software. Maybe we make the news or something. And it was so funny that this one girl decided to swipe right and laugh with me about it. Unfortunately, she was from Houston. She had been in Phoenix for a work related trip and then gone home. And we had mused about me going to visit her. I kind of blew it off, that's crazy. I didn't tell her that, but I kind of blew it off. Well, the next week, two planes had crashed. And so I thought I got to fly somewhere before I develop another fear of flying. Because when I was a kid, we had a series of plane crashes within the space of a couple hours. Intentional, obviously, but I got a huge fear of flying after that for many years. And so I decided I'm going to go see her in Houston, just so I could head off any of this fear. I got on the plane. As we were approaching Houston, I got scared out of my mind because I remembered what happened when that plane was approaching D.C., and I decided to joke with the guy sitting in front of me. He was a little bit younger than me. And I had told him about the trip to see the girl. And I asked him if he would mind if I kicked his seat, because when I was a child, I used to love to kick seats, and that would help me relax a little bit. He said, sure, why not? And I put my foot up and I whacked his seat really hard. And the flight attendant and the other people at the plane looked at us. with a really dirty look. And I explained to the flight attendant, I'm just trying to head off anxiety, given what happened in DC a couple weeks ago. And so the flight attendant still thought that was a weird way of doing it. But we landed safely, and I thanked everybody involved to help me get through the anxiety. And that was that. Unfortunately, we're still good friends. So didn't turn out. In fact, she and I like to give each other advice on how to network with other people. And I gave her an art piece that I made many years ago to give you an idea of how old that piece was. Made of crystalline gold, but it was so old that when I did the calculation, it has about 1 million atoms or so of rat killer gold just from how old it was. So it's one of my first pieces, and she proudly displays it. So that's good. And then I got back to Phoenix, and I met a girl who's into literature. She's half Polish, so I like to call her Eve Curry. Unfortunately, she's juggling two jobs and a writing career, and that's part of the problem with the United States. In another culture where we didn't have to juggle two jobs to make ends meet, the relationship probably would have been in a different gear, right? And then finally, one day, she was so late showing up to dinner. The Eve Curry was so late showing up to dinner one night. I decided to read a little bit about the biography of the real Eve Curry, and that's when I discovered one of Mary Curry's granddaughters is still alive and still very active. Had a university email, and I decided to email her, tell her about my experiments, chemistry experiments, and all that. And long story short, we had a few email exchanges, but obviously she's elderly and has a lot on her mind. I'm going to be going back to Taiwan soon, maybe pivot my career there. Um, and so get to know the girl a little bit better in Taiwan. I had such good fortunes asking Mary Curry for the connections. When my other grandmother passes away, I hope to leave some actual Polish gold in her casket. I have an idea of how to extract actual Polish gold, believe it or not, from household dust. If you can believe. If we look at some of the walls in the library, if it's dusty, there's probably a few atoms there. And so, all right, please continue to pray for 6 months now, and a lot of good connections, and I feel a lot safer now. Now, if I got COVID-19 today with it being 110 degrees, yeah, I'd still have to handle a lot of things by myself, but just knowing that I'm in the right direction makes me feel a lot safer. This is the Peter Like Show. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Like Show. Bum 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 bum.